Hello photographers, today I'm going to explain the ISO setting. An ISO is a function on your camera that works with your aperture and shutter speed. All three of those controls allow you to change how much light you capture when you take a photograph. So when you change your ISO setting, you can increase or decrease the amount of light you will get in a particular photograph. And how the ISO works, practically speaking, in other words, what the ISO does to your pictures is make it brighter if you increase the ISO or darker if you turn it down. And a lot of people say that the ISO changes how sensitive your camera sensor is to light. Now that's not technically true, but technically it doesn't matter because practically what happens is when you increase your ISO, you get more light in your picture. This is super helpful because in some situations, you just need more light in order to get a sharp photo. When we're shooting in low light, we're often fighting to get a shutter speed that's fast enough to allow us to capture a sharp image. And if you're able to increase that ISO, which gets you more light in your image, you're then able to bring up that shutter speed and often get it to that place where you can capture a sharp image. So let's take a look at what the numbers for ISO actually mean. This is a common ISO range for a modern DSLR or mirrorless camera. Typically, a camera starts with a low ISO of something like 100. And the lower the number is, the less light you're going to capture. And then as you go up in the ISO scale, you will get more light. But how much light you get will depend upon the number you choose. So you have these whole numbers like 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600. And then you have these in-between numbers like 160, 240. And the whole numbers are full stop increments. Now, if you don't know what a stop is, check this video out right here. It explains it. In short, though, a stop is how we measure the change in light. And a stop either doubles the amount of light you get or cuts it in half. So if you go from 100 to 200, you're going to get twice as much light in that photograph. And then if you go from 200 down to 100, you're going to get half as much light. Now those in-between numbers give you finesse in choosing how much light you want to add. Sometimes you may just want to go from 100 to 200 and double the brightness of the image. But sometimes you just want that image to be a tiny bit brighter. And if you want it to be just a tiny bit brighter, you can go from 100 to 160. That is a 1/3 stop change. Now, one of the questions I get all of the time is, how do you know what ISO to choose when you're out taking pictures? This is actually pretty straightforward, but the thing that catches people up on this is getting too obsessed with the noise. Now, we're going to come back to the noise in a minute, but first we're just going to talk about choosing the ISO. Generally speaking, when you're in very bright conditions, like in full sun outside, or in very well-lit rooms when you're indoors taking photos, in those situations, you generally want to choose a lower ISO setting. And so it logically follows that if you're shooting in a low light situation where it's quite dim, in a dark room, outside during the evening, at a party of some sort, when you don't have a lot of available light, that's when you would want to increase your ISO. Now, I can't give you an exact ISO setting to use in low light or to use when you're at a party or whatever the case may be, because every situation is going to be different. But the idea here is that you want to choose the lowest ISO possible, but the highest ISO necessary for you to get that photo. And as I mentioned earlier, when we're shooting in lower light situations where we tend to have to increase the ISO, we're fighting to get a shutter speed that will allow us to capture a sharp image. So what you want to do is just increase that ISO to the point that you're able to get a shutter speed that will allow you to capture a sharp image. And this brings us to the noise, because most people know that when you are shooting at higher ISOs, you get noise introduced into your image. Noise is digital artifacts, randomness in the signal that is generated by the camera sensor when you're taking a photograph. And the higher your ISO is, the more prevalent that noise is in your image. Most people want as little noise as possible in their images, which I totally understand. But in some cases, you just need to shoot at a higher ISO, which is why you want the lowest ISO possible, but the highest one necessary. The idea here is that if you are trying to take a photograph, it is better to take a photograph that is noisy and as good as it can be for that situation than to have no photograph whatsoever. Imagine, for example, you're at a party with a family member, and maybe it's an elderly family member who is going to pass away someday, right? Because it happens. Would you rather take your photograph of that person that you care deeply about and have that photo even though it has noise in it? Or would you say, oh, I can't take this photo of grandma because I would have to shoot it at ISO 3200 and that's just too noisy? When you think about it like that, it's nonsense, isn't it? I would much rather have that photo of that person or the situation I'm in, whatever the case it is, than to not have any photo at all. Now, the last thing I want to mention is something that actually doesn't matter, but it's sort of fun to talk about, which is how to pronounce ISO. As you've heard this entire video, I've been saying ISO, as in ISO is a word. Some people say ISO. Neither option here is actually right or wrong. It's like GIF and GIF, or bokeh and bokeh. Right? Like, who cares how you say it? What matters is that you know what the ISO does and you know how to use the ISO on your camera, which is what I wanted to share with you today. So if you have any questions about the ISO, let me know down in the comments. And while you're down there, tell me, do you pronounce it ISO or ISO? Tell me what camp you're in. And if you want to learn more about ISO and how to use it, check out this link right here where you can get my free ISO cheat sheet and guide. Again, if you have any questions, let me know down in the comments and then get out there and take some damn photos.